Appropriation Act.
Thank you very much, Yusuf. And once again, good morning, Nigerians, and Happy New Year. I think I should start with the comment from the Honorable Minister of Finance, where she stated that the performance of the budget for 2020 was about 97.7% in terms of implementation. And therefore, it's something that we should commend. I stand to be corrected that this perhaps may be the first time we are hitting this particular volume in terms of performance and implementation of our budget. Therefore, kudos to the government. Now, I would also begin to look at 2021 budget in comparison with what we had in 2020, and then look at the impact so that the figures would not begin to speak to realities, speak to the lives and livelihoods of Nigerians. Because, you know, budgets are always created and formulated to impact on human beings, impact on citizens. What we need to do is to start looking at what was the impact of 2020 budget on Nigerians. I think that should be the starting point. And if you ask me, 97.7%, I'm not judging. In terms of performance, perhaps we need to take a little bit of a step further to now begin to ask ourselves what sectors were actually impacted, what has moved forward. In terms of infrastructure, what value addition has been added? And of course, you mentioned trade. In terms of trade, what kind of infrastructure, trade infrastructure, do we have on ground as we speak? And of course, you can see that rails are springing up here and there, which are facilitators of trade. I mean, in terms of infrastructure, that you can say, yes, we see where funds are heading into. Again, what about our roads? What about ports infrastructure? We are talking about heading into AFCFT implementation. If our ports, for instance, are still not in a position to receive or facilitate the export of goods and services, where are we? What has the budget done in this regard? We also look at it from the angle of food security. Here we are, food prices are going higher. What was the impact of our 2020 budget on food availability, food sustainability, as well as food security? What was the impact of that budget on nutrition, for instance? And how did the budget impact on small-scale farmers to the extent that they have inputs available for them, to the extent that they can now be talking to us and say, yes, out of what we need in terms of capacity utilization in the country, this is what we've been able to produce. These are things we need to.
Dr. Ken, you've been there, you've been here in this country for at least quite a long time. And when you mention all this, you should have been, a party or a witness, I would say, to all these things between January 2020 and December 31, 2021, when the lifespan of that budget expired. And as you said, 97.7% performance is a good grade, wherever you go, right? So these items you're mentioning, all right, are part of 97.7%. Now, how do you see 2021, really 2021 appropriation law, all right, playing out in order to consolidate on this? How do you see it?
And that's exactly where I was heading to. Honestly, when I look at 2021 budget, first of all, we had a budget proposal of 13.08 trillion. And then when it came out from the National Assembly through appropriation, we now have 13.588 trillion, an addition of about 500 billion. Now, if we have these figures, I have not taken my time to look at what exactly, the president just signed the budget into law. The specific figures are not readily clear yet in terms of, number one, what constitutes the 500 extra that the National Assembly, in their wisdom, had added. But let's look at it as a big chunk of fund, holistically. Now, I look at it from let me start from the trade. Capital expenditure for the trade sector is about, I think 58 billion. And I look at the capital expenditure for, the total budget for agriculture. I see 137 billion. Okay. Now, I begin to look at what happened in 2020 and now the budget of 2021. Starting from food security, because I'm so much interested in food security, because you need to eat first. We need to be alive. And moreover, we are also in recession. We need to jump out. Now, if I look at these figures, when I do some comparisons, the 2020 budget, we had about 1.3 thereabouts in terms of total allocation to agriculture. But this time around, we have 1.37 now, or thereabouts. What has shifted? What will that impact on food security? Today we have food prices going up.
Okay, Dr. Ken,
yes,
we just wanted to tease this conversation, because we would have a more deeper and elaborate conversation on it next week, because we also have to touch on the beginning of the single market. So let's quickly bring in other guests to also share their perspectives. And I'd like to go to our Kaduna studio where Dr. Sani Bello, who is an associate professor of accounting.
We can now trade across the continent. Tariffs have been removed, and there are a lot of them. Do you see this as positive, really, looking at the size, the quality, and the quantity of some economies in Africa in comparison to others? Nigeria, for instance, compared to a very tiny country somewhere, and of course our GDP and their own, and our manufacturing capacity and their own, our market and their own. Do you see this really being really beneficial to all members?
Every trade agreement has its costs and benefits. And also, we must realize the fact that that's the reason why we negotiate trade, so that there'll be symbiotic, if you like, relationship in the transaction of the trade, or in the implementation of that trade and enforcement of the rules guiding such trade, to the extent that citizens or the human beings, the population, would not suffer as a result of that trade agreement. Now, having said this, the AFCFTA has come to play and then it's taken off today. But that does not mean that countries that are weak or perceived to be weak will be losing. There is comparative advantage for every country. And therefore, what every country would need to do is to identify that advantage, that value addition, where you can be able to compete. And in doing that, you can now leverage on that and then jump the scale. But in terms of the advantage for us cumulatively as a union, as Africa, I think this has really signified that we can really handle things ourselves because we have missed the line for a long time. 1.2 billion market.
You know, Ken.
Yes.
Because we have a very short time to look at this, briefly. There is no doubt about the benefit of this. We've talked over and over about this, even on this program. Yes, indeed, having a very large trading bloc, gives the continent an advantage, in terms of trade volumes and economic benefits. But let us look at, the legal binding, rules. How well, because this market has taken off today, which means now if you have all the necessary, documents, if you have the product, expectable products, you can do business. That's what it means. But what about the rules binding those trading business? Nationals would always protect their national interest in the areas of health, security, and all that. And, one gap in ECOWAS was the fact that member countries interpreted, some of the rules differently based on their national interest. The concept of inadmissible citizens, for instance, has been generating issues. Do we understand? I mean, Nigerian participants, do we understand these trade rules explicitly?
I don't think I'll be doing Nigerians good if I sit down here to say that Nigerians have understood the rules guiding the AFCFTA now. That's improper. But I think this might take some processes. There are quite a number of rules. The AFCFTA is a rule on itself, but then apart from that, you also have protocols on different axes. For instance, you have the dispute settlement mechanism protocol. You have the rules of origin protocol. Don't also forget that we are going to have a services protocol in that. We also, there are quite a lot.
So what would happen now if they don't understand these rules? So what would happen now?
That's actually a fear I have. However, I am not sure that all will be liberalized today. It is a gradual, progressive liberalization that we are engaging into. But my problem, I think where we should be looking at is our preparedness in terms of port operation. In terms of, there's a question you raised, very important question. For us as Nigerians, we should be asking ourselves, do we have the capacity to export, even though we have very big muscle in terms of financial capacity, in terms of the banks of Nigerians located in every part of the continent. We also have capacity in terms of production, manufacturing. However, looking at our ports, look at Tinkan, look at Wharf in Lagos. Look at the infrastructure there. Look at the roads. Look at the fact that trailers and containers will be there, and even getting to overtime cargo. Do we have that capacity to do ourselves good?
Okay.
And benefit from the value added by the AFC?
I think we should just get a closing remark from Professor Lalikon, who is a professor in entrepreneurship, and they are key, within the single market opening that we've
and maybe that would be in 30 seconds if possible.
Yes.